the dial. This is not Frank Stanford. It's Joe Perkins from CTV News Vancouver Island, filling in for Frank Stanford. This is CTV News Week on CFAX 1070. All week from 1 to 3, we have our CTV News personalities coming up, filling in, trying to do a good job. We'll see how this goes. Anyway, we're continuing our election coverage. Obviously, that's the big story. We had a few political scientists on during the first half hour. Now we're going to focus our attention on something that British Columbians have been focusing on very closely, Initiative 502, legalizing marijuana, taxing it, and last night, a major milestone for marijuana in North America. I have with me in studio Ted Smith, well known in Victoria, a marijuana activist, but also more recently a teacher, has a new book out, Hempology 101. Ted, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a huge day for us.
Yeah, and I can see, I spoke to you on Monday and I could see it in your face. You are so happy.
Well, this is, the biggest event that I've ever witnessed in my 17-year career. It's huge. This is, monumental. It's a game changer, really. Or as I, said Monday, it's like the TSN turning point, right? When the game's all said and done, in 100 years from now, we'll be referring to the votes in Washington as Colorado as being, the tipping point where the war went the other direction. It's sort of like D-Day where we're on the shore now.
You could also look at this, though. Yes, Washington voted 55% in favor of legalizing and taxing marijuana. Colorado, a state that wasn't predicted to be close, they also voted in favor of it. Oregon did not. There's still a long ways to go. People that are watching this, it's not like marijuana is going to be legal tomorrow. You don't bust out the streamers right now if you're a cannabis supporter and start cheering. There's a good chance that this could not be made legal. Is that correct?
Well, you're right. The war could go the other direction. The story isn't done yet. There's a good reason to celebrate today, but the work goes on, certainly in other states and in other countries. Much like, the other analogies that I used, right? This is more like we've actually gotten on the beach. We haven't reclaimed, countries per se. But the game has changed in our favor. We need to keep that momentum going. We can't just, throw our hands up in the air and say, hey, we've won. We've, got the public support behind us and la, la, la. It's like, the sign that it is a winnable war. And before, it didn't seem that way. It seemed like we had this massive, government and on both sides of the border that has inexhaustible resources to put into crime and punishment, and no real reason to listen to the public or to even make this an election issue. This has never been an election issue here in Canada. It's really just been swept under the table since the day it was implemented.
I think you could make the argument that for many years Canada was leading the charge to legalize marijuana. That was where it was really coming from, was north of the 49th parallel. Now it seems like the Americans are leading the charge. What happened? Did British Columbians and other Canadians just give up?
Well, certainly, I would say leading up to about 2003, we were leading the charge. It was that way in court and on the streets, and the medical program had just been enacted here in Canada, and there was a groundswell. But that curbed for different reasons. Certainly, the Harper government has set a chill through our community, and that has had a negative impact. Mark Emery's arrest and his being sent to the United States has had an impact on the cannabis activism in Canada, and how far people are willing to push it, because no one really wants to go to jail. And so there's been a few things here, and court decisions as well. In 2003, Supreme Court of Canada decision upheld the possession charge, or possession. And so that decision kind of took a lot of steam out of those of us that were hoping courts would in fact secure our rights. So, there's been a stall here in Canada for those reasons. But in the United States, the harshness of the laws, the draconian measures that have been implemented have created a a broader groundswell against them than we see here in Canada. You know, in a way, the laws haven't been enforced as harshly, the penalties aren't as harsh, the stigma isn't as much, and so, you know, Canadians aren't making this an election issue, or they haven't until recently. Now we hope to, you know, take advantage of this and have an initiative to decriminalize cannabis in British Columbia come, and following the HST, but you know, until now, we haven't done anything like that. We don't have the same mechanisms to pass ballot initiatives here. So in the U.S., they have somewhat more of a democratic system to change laws. So
before we really get into how this could affect British Columbia, first, summarize, if you could. I mean, you have been fighting for this, the same sort of legalization, taxation here in British Columbia. Summarize for me, if you could, why. I mean, there's a lot of people, I think, out there that say they're so far on the other side of this battle. They're against it. There's no way. They see it as a drug that could never be legalized. Why, in your mind, should it be?
Well, I guess speaking as a young person who might not have grown up yet, while people that are prohibitionists might think the war on drugs protects youth, it actually does quite the opposite. I started to smoke hash in Ontario at the age of 16, and upon using it, I realized that I'd been lied to, and that, in fact, our government had not only lied to me, but to the entire population, and that there was this completely ineffective and, in fact, a law that infringed upon our rights. And so instead of the police protecting me, at 16 years old, the police became someone that I couldn't trust because they were part of this system that had lied to me and was taking away my rights that they were telling me were guaranteed. And so I would think that, you know, legalizing cannabis would create a respect for the law, or more respect for the law than we see under the current system for young people. And cannabis is, and so, you know, to your point, like, you know, the only people I would say that are against these laws are really those that think young people shouldn't have access to it.
Well, I think the big issues, Ted, have to be the ability to tax it. I mean, the revenue that could be created from taxing, legalizing, and then taxing marijuana is huge. I think it was billions of dollars Washington State predicted if they put a 25% tax on it. 40% would go to the government, 60% would be in, I believe it was in support networks to help addicts, that sort of thing. That's got to be in it. Is that an issue that you're fighting for as well? The ability that, you know, if we legalize it up here, hey, the government would have a few extra bucks to maybe help some other programs, maybe education, healthcare. Oh,
definitely. You know, we need to tax and regulate, you know, these products instead of the system now that allows for none of that. You know, I work with the Cannabis Buyers Club of Victoria, and right now it's paying about $25,000 a month in HST for simple medical sales here in Victoria. And that's just the tip of the iceberg for what could be coming in, you know, on a, you know, constant basis. I think it was about $2 billion a year they estimated in the States, but I think those estimates are low because they don't account for a number of other industries that would be allowed to flourish. For example, there'd be a whole industry in testing the cannabis products that would evolve because the consumers have a right to know the exact, you know, profile of the chemicals, because the reason there's so many different plants is because they have different combination of the active ingredients in cannabis, and so the consumers have a right to know the cannabinoid profiles. They also have the right to have it tested for you know, any pesticide use, or more importantly, heavy metals or other chemicals that may be picked up in the fertilizers. So, you know, having it, you know, organic standards for things that are smoked would be, you know, important to many people. So, you know, there'd be a lot of employment in also the service industry. So we'd have bed and breakfast open up. We'd have cafes open up. There would be a large cottage industry similar to the wine industries that have, you know, come up around the world, where people travel to go and test, you know, the local wines and visit the local wineries.
Before we get to that, or to a future that you're talking about, I mean, there's a big barrier to the federal government. When we talk about this issue, and we do it often, especially on CTV News, it's the same answer. You talk to the provincial government and they say it's a federal issue. If laws are going to change, it has to come from Ottawa. Sure, Washington and Colorado voters voted in favor of this, but in Canada, what sort of impact, concrete impact, will this have? Is it just a sign that, hey, perhaps times are changing, or is it really going to lead to some significant and well, soon, I don't want to say soon, but some significant changes that could happen in the near future?
Well, hopefully it becomes an election issue.
Yes.
Even here in Victoria, I believe the candidates are going to be challenged on their position about cannabis and legalization now that the states appears to be legalizing it. It's sort of funny, like, you know, shouldn't we be threatening to shut our border down now because we don't want that Washington state pot coming up here? But
that's a whole nother conversation. I mean, what's going to happen?
You know, that's not what I think people will be saying from this. Quite the opposite. It more should be we should be importing their policies. And I think now that the United States is changing their policies, it can become an election issue, and I really hope it does. I hope that by that time British Columbia has decriminalized cannabis as well, and that will force it to become an election issue, because at least we'll have stopped on the expenditure side somewhat, so we won't be wasting money trying to enforce the law, even though the lost potential of revenue will still be a dominant issue, because decriminalization is sort of lawyers' term for job protection. It really doesn't deal with where all the money's going, and it doesn't take the money away from organized criminals and people that shouldn't have access to this market. And so we would love to see that policy brought up here, and I think this is going to make it an election issue, especially if the states are able to implement and follow through upon this, because there's going to be a battle in the United States, much like we're talking here, where, you know, certain cities and provinces don't agree with the federal drug laws, but we're bound to them. Well, in the United States, the DEA has constantly been enforcing their laws on states like California, who have medical laws, and now there's 18. Massachusetts passed a medical law there yesterday as well, which makes it 18 states that have medical marijuana laws. But the DEA will still go in and periodically raid clubs in different states, and they have been constantly going to court against these various states. The Obama administration has actually been very anti-cannabis and been arresting people just as quickly, been raiding or more clubs, I should say, in the United States have been raided under Obama than were raided under Bush even. And so, you know, there's a big war going down there between the feds. But at this point, you know, we're not going to change the conservatives' mind. Like, you know, this or anything else short of a sign from God won't do that.
You're listening to Ted Smith. He's been fighting for the legalization and taxation of marijuana for close to 2 decades. And major win for your fight last night came south of the border. Washington and Colorado voters voting in favor of the legalization of marijuana. Very interesting, controversial topic. We're going to continue talking to Ted Smith when we come back. But first, a break. You're listening to CFAX.